The night was alive with the sound of wind, the trees swaying like ancient sentinels, when a bone-chilling cry broke the stillness. The desperate screeches of a creature in agony echoed through the dark forest, sending a shiver through the air. The noise was unmistakable. The sharp, jagged cry of a tiger in distress. A sound that pierced the night like a scream for help. It came from deeper within the wilderness, a place so remote that even the moon seemed reluctant to cast light there. Each cry was a whisper of pain, pulling at the heartstrings of anyone who heard it. Alex, a seasoned wildlife rescuer, froze mid-step, his heart pounding in his chest as the sound registered in his mind. Without hesitation he pushed forward, his mind racing through 1,000 possibilities. Was it trapped? Was it injured? Every second counted. The darkness was thick, but he was already running toward the source of the sound, every instinct telling him this could be a life-or-death situation. The urgency in the tiger's cries grew louder, and Alex's pulse quickened. He had to make it in time, whatever it took. The rustle of branches, the snap of twigs beneath his boots, all seemed like distractions from the task ahead. This wasn't just another rescue, it was a race against time. The forest was eerily silent now, the night air thick with tension. Alex crouched beside the tiger, his hands shaking as he gently checked its injuries. The tiger's body was battered, its breath shallow, but there was a spark of life in its amber eyes. He had seen this before. Animals with injuries so severe, they only clung to survival through sheer will. Alex wiped the sweat from his forehead, trying to steady his breath. This wasn't just another rescue mission. It felt different, more personal. He had rescued countless creatures in the past, but something about this tiger seemed to resonate with him on a deeper level. It reminded him of a rescue gone wrong, years ago, a tiger that didn't make it. He had tried his best, but in the end, the tiger had succumbed to its injuries, and the failure had haunted him ever since. This time, he couldn't let history repeat itself. He owed it to this tiger. He owed it to the memory of the one he had lost. The tiger let out another soft growl, pulling Alex from his thoughts. He steadied his breathing, pushing the guilt aside. He couldn't afford to dwell on past mistakes. There was no time for that. He had a job to do, and failure was not an option this time. Alex stood up, taking a step back from the tiger. The injuries were severe, but they weren't fatal, not yet. He could still save it. His mind raced as he assessed the situation. The storm was closing in, and he had no choice but to move the tiger before it was too late. He turned to the rest of the team, who had been standing by, ready to assist but holding back, unsure of how to proceed. "We need to get it out of here," Alex said, his voice steady but urgent. "Now." A younger team member, Jake, hesitated, looking at the tiger and then at Alex. "Are you sure it's safe to move it?" Jake asked, his voice filled with doubt. Alex glanced at the tiger, who was now trying to lift its head, its muscles trembling with effort. "If we don't act quickly, it will die here. We don't have time to wait for the storm to pass." Jake nodded reluctantly, understanding the urgency, but the tension was palpable. The team quickly gathered their equipment and prepared to move the tiger, but the looming storm added a layer of unpredictability. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away faster than he could control. As the team carefully lifted the tiger, its body stiffened, a low growl escaping its throat. Alex whispered soothing words, trying to calm the animal, but the tiger's pain was evident in every sharp intake of breath. "It's okay. We're going to get you out of here," Alex muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. Every movement felt like it could push the tiger over the edge, but they had no choice. The storm was growing closer, and the risks of staying in the open were too great. The tiger's body shifted in its restraints, and Alex's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't afford to fail again. The weight of his past failures, the ones he never spoke about, weighed heavily on him. He had seen too many creatures suffer because he had been too late, too hesitant. This tiger, this moment, could either redeem him or haunt him forever. But in this moment, all that mattered was getting the tiger to safety. The rain began to fall just as the team moved the tiger toward a more secure location. It wasn't heavy yet, but the wind picked up, whipping through the trees and making the air feel colder. Alex could hear the faint rumble of thunder in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. "We have to move faster," Alex urged, his voice strained with urgency. The path ahead was slippery, and the team struggled to keep their footing as the rain soaked their clothes. Every step was a battle against the weather, but Alex's mind was locked on one goal: getting the tiger to safety. He knew the storm would make things worse, but he also knew that every second they delayed could be the difference between life and death. The tiger's body remained stiff in its restraints, but Alex could feel its pulse under his fingers, steady and strong. That was enough for now. It was alive, and that meant there was hope. As the team reached the temporary shelter, Alex quickly assessed the tiger's condition again. The rain beat down harder now, making it difficult to hear anything other than the pounding of water on the roof of the shelter. The tiger's condition had not improved, but it hadn't worsened either. That was something at least. Alex kneeled beside the tiger, his hands carefully checking the bandages and wounds. "Oh?" The animal's eyes fluttered open, briefly locking onto his. It wasn't the kind of connection he'd hoped for. There was no trust, just a deep fear of humans. But it was a sign. The tiger was still aware, still fighting. "You're strong," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. But deep down, he knew the fight was far from over. They were safe for now, but the hardest part was still ahead. Alex pushed forward, each step louder than the last in the oppressive silence. The cries of the tiger were still ringing in his ears, but the distance between them seemed to grow with every minute. The forest was alive with sounds, rustling leaves, the creak of trees swaying in the wind, but it felt eerily empty. He was deep within the heart of the wilderness now, the path barely distinguishable from the underbrush, and the shadows seemed to stretch infinitely before him. The tension in the air was palpable. There was no telling what dangers lurked just beyond his reach. His hand gripped the machete at his side, ready to clear any obstacle, but his mind was elsewhere. The tiger's cries had shaken him, and he couldn't shake the image of its suffering. He knew time was running out, each cry sounded weaker, and his heart pounded faster with every second. He cursed under his breath, pushing past the thick brambles. There was no going back now. His only focus was the tiger, the only thing that mattered in this dark and dangerous place. He had to save it. There was no room for hesitation. He couldn't afford to fail again. The memory of his past failure, a rescue mission that had gone horribly wrong, hovered over him like a shadow. It had been his mistake, and he couldn't let history repeat itself. As he pushed deeper into the forest, Alex's mind raced. The further he went, the more isolated he felt from the world outside. The path was barely visible now, swallowed by the dense thicket. He stumbled over rocks and uneven ground, his senses on high alert. The cries were growing weaker, and the fear in his chest tightened with each passing second. He couldn't afford to slow down, not even for a moment. The weight of the task felt heavier now, a pressure building in his chest. He could still hear the tiger's suffering in his ears, each cry a reminder of the stakes. The forest was alive, yet all Alex could focus on was the sound of the tiger's cries. His mind flashed to the past, to that one rescue mission that had gone wrong. A life lost, a failure that had followed him ever since. This was his chance for redemption. It had to be. But as the cries grew softer, a cold doubt seeped in. Was he too late? Could he still save this tiger? Thought gnawed at him, but he pushed it away. There was no time to think about failure. Not now. Alex finally reached a clearing, his breath ragged from the exertion. The cries were now distinct, unmistakable. The tiger was close, too close for comfort, and he could feel his pulse quicken. He could see it now, a dark figure partially hidden in the shadows, its body trembling. The trap was still there, clinging to the tiger's leg. It had to be painful. Alex's stomach tightened as he crouched down to assess the situation. The animal was too still, too quiet now. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. This was it, the moment he had been rushing toward, the moment that could either make or break the entire mission. He looked at the tiger's face, its eyes wide and filled with fear. Alex's heart sank. The animal's body was covered in blood, and its injuries looked worse than he had anticipated. But it was still alive, still breathing, and that was all that mattered. He had to act quickly, decisively, before the storm caught up with them. He reached for his medical kit, his hands steady despite the weight of the situation. There was no room for mistakes. Not this time. With steady hands, Alex worked quickly, removing the trap from the tiger's leg. The animal hissed in pain, but Alex didn't flinch. He had seen this kind of suffering before, and he had learned to push his emotions aside. The storm was coming. The rain was just beginning to fall, lightly at first, but Alex knew it would intensify quickly. He had to stabilize the tiger before it worsened. His hands worked in practiced motions as he applied pressure to the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. He could feel the animal's muscles trembling under his fingers, the heat radiating from its body. The tiger's eyes were fixed on him, filled with a mix of fear and exhaustion. Alex knew that the connection between them was tenuous at best, but in this moment, it was enough. He had to get this tiger to safety. The storm was picking up, and time was slipping away faster than he could keep up with. But there was still a chance. As long as the tiger was alive, there was still hope. The team had moved the tiger as far as they could, but the path ahead was becoming more treacherous with each step. Alex could feel the storm closing in, the rain now falling in sheets, making the trail slippery and hard to navigate. His boots slipped in the mud as he carefully adjusted his grip on the stretcher, but he couldn't stop. Not now. The tiger's body was still and unresponsive, but it wasn't dead. The shallow breaths it took were the only signs of life, and Alex clung to them like a lifeline. His thoughts raced. The storm had delayed them, and now the trail was nearly impassable. Every step felt like a battle against the weather and the clock. He could hear the distant rumblings of thunder, but the real danger was the rising floodwaters. The terrain had shifted overnight, and it was more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. "Keep moving," Alex urged, his voice gruff and urgent. The team responded, but there was an undeniable strain in their movements. The weight of the storm, the fatigue from the long journey, and the fear of losing the tiger, it was all starting to take its toll. But Alex wouldn't let them give up. "We're not stopping. Not until we reach the shelter." The path ahead seemed to disappear as the floodwaters began to rise, rushing through the forest like a chaotic river. Alex halted, his heart pounding as the water surged forward, flooding the ground around them. "We need to move fast," he barked, his voice strained. The team stopped in their tracks, the realization dawning on them that they were about to be swept away if they didn't act quickly. Alex could see the panic in their eyes, but he didn't have time to comfort them. The tiger, still unconscious, was growing heavier, and every second spent standing still felt like a wasted opportunity. "Grab the rope," Alex ordered, and one of the team members quickly reached into their pack for the survival rope. The water continued to rise, now ankle-deep, and the urgency in Alex's voice heightened. "We're not losing this tiger. We're getting out of here, no matter what." His grip tightened on the stretcher, but the floodwaters were relentless. The forest, which had once felt like a sanctuary, was now a menacing maze that threatened to trap them. As the floodwaters continued to rise, the team struggled to move forward. The rope, now tied securely to a nearby tree, gave them something to hold on to as they fought against the current. But it was a losing battle. The ground was turning into a slippery, uneven mess, and the team's progress had slowed to a crawl. Alex's muscles ached from the effort, but he refused to stop. "Come on, we're almost there," he shouted, though even he wasn't sure if they would make it in time. The storm was picking up again, and Alex could feel the pressure mounting, both from the storm and the weight of the tiger's life, hanging in the balance. His mind raced. Was there another way? Could they make it to higher ground before the flood overwhelmed them? The answer didn't come quickly enough. His gaze flicked toward the others, and he saw the same fear mirrored in their faces. They were all exhausted, each one pushing their limits. But they couldn't turn back now. The tiger needed them. They had no choice but to keep moving. The team reached a small rise, a narrow strip of dry land where they could catch their breath. Alex felt the tension in his chest loosen, but only slightly. The tiger was still alive, but it was clear that the battle wasn't over yet. The storm had taken its toll, and the floodwaters had made the journey harder than they ever anticipated. Alex wiped the water from his face and glanced at the team. They were all soaked to the bone, their faces lined with exhaustion, but there was no time for rest. "We've made it this far," Alex said, his voice hoarse. "We're not stopping now." He looked at the stretcher, where the tiger lay motionless but still breathing. They had to get to the shelter, but the hardest part was still ahead. The path was unpredictable, and the worst of the storm hadn't even hit yet. "Get ready," Alex continued, trying to rally the team. "We push on. Stay focused." They nodded, and though they were tired, their resolve was unwavering. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. The storm was relentless, but Alex's focus never wavered. The team moved forward, each step becoming more difficult as they navigated the slippery, waterlogged path. The worst of the flooding seemed to have passed, but the storm's fury was still intense, with thunder cracking above them and flashes of lightning illuminating the dark forest. Alex glanced down at the stretcher. The tiger's body was still, and though it was alive, it wasn't out of danger yet. Every muscle in Alex's body screamed for rest, but there was no time for that. They were so close to the shelter. The worst was over. The light from the shelter's lanterns gleamed faintly through the trees ahead, promising safety. Alex could hear the others' labored breathing, but their determination kept them moving forward. There was still time, and there was still hope. The team had made it to the shelter, but the relief Alex had been expecting was strangely absent. The storm raged outside, but it felt like something was missing. Alex stood by the window, his thoughts racing, his fingers trembling slightly as they gripped the wet cloth of his jacket. The tiger had been placed on a makeshift bed, and while it had survived the worst of the storm, its condition was still critical. But it wasn't just the tiger that weighed on Alex's mind. He could feel something in the air, a tension, an unease that hadn't been there before. It wasn't until the shelter door creaked open that he realized the real danger wasn't from the storm, but from what lay ahead. A figure stepped inside, drenched from the downpour. It was a local villager, someone who Alex had hoped to avoid. The man's eyes locked onto Alex with a coldness that sent a shiver down his spine. "You shouldn't have brought it here," the man said, his voice low, filled with unspoken threat. Alex's stomach tightened. He knew the laws of the area well, poaching laws specifically, and bringing an animal like this to a shelter was illegal. But the tiger's life was on the line. "It's just a few more hours," Alex said, trying to mask the growing tension in his voice. "We just need time." But the man's cold stare said everything. The trouble wasn't just the tiger. It was the law. Alex's actions could cost him more than just his reputation. It could cost him his freedom. The villager's presence in the shelter shifted the atmosphere immediately. Alex felt his heart pound in his chest. He had known this was a risk. The laws about endangered animals were strict, and harboring such a creature was considered illegal. But the tiger had been abandoned, wounded, and left to die by those who had once held it captive. Alex's decision was simple: save the animal. Yet in that moment, the moral weight of the situation hit him hard. "You realize the consequences, don't you?" the villager asked, his voice cold, but not unkind. "This isn't just about you or the tiger. It's about everyone who lives here. If the authorities find out, we'll all pay the price." Alex's mind raced, fighting to reconcile the morality of his actions with the harsh reality of the law. The tiger had been someone's pet, and that made things infinitely more complicated. If it had been a wild animal, there might have been more leeway, but this was different. This was a creature that had been abused, and Alex could feel the weight of responsibility bearing down on him. "I couldn't leave it to die," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible. The villager's face softened slightly, but he didn't look away. "You didn't just risk your life, Alex. You risked all of ours." Alex sat down beside the tiger, his hands resting lightly on the animal's side. The villager remained silent for a moment, then sighed deeply. "You know, I've seen this before," the villager said, his voice quiet but steady. "People get attached to animals, they think they can save them, but in the end, it doesn't work out. They end up either dead or worse, taken by the authorities." The words stung, but Alex didn't flinch. He had heard them before, from people who didn't understand the bond that could exist between a person and an animal. "This isn't just about saving it," Alex replied, his voice low and firm. "It's about giving it a chance. It's about doing what's right, even if it costs us everything." The villager's gaze softened slightly. "I didn't say it wasn't the right thing to do, Alex. But you need to understand the reality of the situation. This tiger wasn't born free. It wasn't meant to be out here." Alex's heart sank. He knew the man was right in some ways. The tiger's suffering was the result of human greed and cruelty, and perhaps it could never be truly free again. But that didn't mean it didn't deserve a chance. "I'm not giving up," Alex said, his voice firm with resolve. "Not now, not ever." The hours passed slowly, with the storm continuing to pound relentlessly on the shelter. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The tension in the room had only grown, and now it was as if the very air was thick with an unspeakable truth. The tiger's condition seemed to worsen despite their best efforts, and Alex began to question whether they had made the right choice in bringing it here. It was then that the villager approached him once again, his face unreadable. "You're not going to like this," the man said, his tone serious. "But I need to tell you something." Alex's heart skipped a beat, and he stood up, facing the villager. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tight with apprehension. "This tiger," the man said slowly, "it didn't just escape from someone's home. It wasn't just abandoned. This tiger was a part of something much bigger, an illegal breeding operation." Alex felt his blood run cold. The weight of the words hit him hard, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. The tiger wasn't just a victim. It was a link in a much darker chain. The implications were staggering, and Alex's world seemed to shift on its axis. Alex's mind was spinning as he processed the revelation. The tiger, the one he had fought so hard to save, was not just an innocent victim of neglect. It was a product of human cruelty, part of an illegal network that had no regard for its life. Alex had made the decision to save it because it was a living creature, a victim of circumstance. But now, the complexity of the situation had multiplied. If the authorities discovered the tiger, it wouldn't just be a rescue, it would be a crime. The moral line had blurred. "So what now?" Alex asked, his voice hoarse. The villager looked at him with a resigned expression. "You have a choice," he said, his voice low. "You can leave with the tiger, take your chances in the wild, and hope it survives. Or you can turn it over, and we all face the consequences." Alex didn't know what to say. The storm outside seemed to mirror his inner turmoil, a battle between what was right and what was safe. For the first time since he had found the tiger, Alex was unsure of what the next step should be. But one thing was certain, his decision was about to change everything. The storm raged on, but it was the deafening silence in the shelter that unsettled Alex the most. The weight of the decisions they had made hung heavily in the air. The tiger lay motionless on the makeshift bed, still breathing, but its condition had not improved. Alex stood over it, the adrenaline that had propelled him through the journey now fading, replaced by exhaustion and a creeping sense of dread. The storm outside wasn't the only thing he feared. The authorities were closing in. They would come, and when they did, they would take the tiger from him. And Alex wasn't sure he could live with that. He had promised to save the animal, but this was a different kind of rescue. The tiger was a symbol now, not just of survival, but of everything Alex had fought for. Every instinct told him to flee, to take the tiger and disappear into the wilderness. But he knew that was a fantasy. The weight of the law, of the consequences, held him in place. He looked at the tiger, wondering if it even knew the price it had paid for its freedom. The realization hit him hard. He wasn't just saving the tiger, he was fighting for something much larger than both of them. A chance at redemption. A chance to prove that there was hope, even in the darkest of times. The decision had to be made, but Alex couldn't bring himself to act. The man's words echoed in his mind, each one a reminder of the dangerous road ahead. The authorities would stop at nothing to retrieve the tiger, but what would that mean for it? Would they throw it back into captivity, subject it to a life of suffering? Or would they simply take it away and end its life, never giving it the chance to heal, to thrive in the wild? Alex paced back and forth, wrestling with his thoughts. He couldn't bring himself to surrender the tiger, not when it had fought so hard to survive. But the threat was real, and every minute they lingered here put them all in danger. The sound of approaching footsteps outside froze Alex in his tracks. His heart raced as he rushed to the window, peering through the rain-soaked glass. The light from the lanterns outside cast strange, flickering shadows across the trees. The authorities were getting closer. His mind screamed to act, to do something, anything, but the moment was slipping away. He couldn't let it be too late. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it now. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as the figures drew nearer. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, a perfect backdrop for the chaos he felt inside. He couldn't stay here. Not now. Not when the tiger's future, his future, depended on getting out of the shelter before they were discovered. His mind raced through possibilities, weighing each option. There was no good choice. The authorities would follow protocol. They would take the tiger away, and that would be the end of it. He couldn't allow that to happen. "We're leaving," Alex said, his voice firm despite the fear that gripped his chest. The team, still huddled in the shelter, looked up, their faces pale with anxiety. They had all heard the footsteps outside, and they knew what that meant. But Alex's resolve was unwavering. "It's now or never," he added, his voice steady. They had no time to lose. They had to act fast, or all their efforts would be for nothing. The storm was their cover, but it wouldn't last forever. Alex grabbed the stretcher, motioning for the team to move quickly. They were running out of time, and there was no turning back. The team moved quickly, their footsteps drowned by the heavy rain, as they made their way through the forest. The trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying violently in the wind, as though the forest itself were trying to stop them. Alex led the way, his heart pounding in his chest. Each step was a gamble, a desperate race against time. The tiger, still on the stretcher, was growing weaker with each passing minute, and Alex could feel the weight of the animal's survival pressing down on him. His breath came in ragged bursts, each inhale burning his lungs. The storm seemed to grow more violent, the wind howling through the trees, as though nature itself was conspiring to thwart their escape. But Alex didn't stop. He couldn't. The only thing that mattered was getting the tiger to safety. His mind flashed back to the face of the villager, to the words that haunted him. "This could be it, Alex. You don't have much time." The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He was running out of time, and the storm was only adding to the chaos. There was no room for failure. Not now. No. As they reached the clearing at the edge of the forest, Alex could see the lights of the authorities in the distance, their vehicles parked just beyond the tree line. The weight of the decision hung heavy on him. They were so close, but the tiger was growing weaker with every passing second. Alex's heart raced. He had to make a decision now, and there was no turning back. He looked down at the tiger, its body barely moving, its life slipping away. The authorities would take it, and that would be the end of it. But Alex couldn't allow that. Not after everything they had been through. "We go now," Alex said, his voice firm with finality. The team nodded, their faces a mix of fear and determination. They were about to make their last stand, and it would either be their salvation or their downfall. But Alex couldn't afford to think about failure. They had one shot, and he wasn't going to waste it. With a final look at the tiger, Alex took a deep breath and turned toward the darkness ahead. The storm had passed, and the jungle was eerily quiet. Alex stood at the edge of a clearing, watching as the first light of dawn illuminated the wet ground. The tiger was alive but still weak. and they had no time to waste. The authorities were not far behind. The escape had been successful, but the real challenge was far from over. Alex felt the weight of every decision weighing on him. The tiger's survival now depended on getting it to higher ground and out of harm's way. "We need to move fast," Alex said, his voice steady but urgent. His team nodded in agreement, understanding the gravity of the situation. The mission wasn't finished yet, and Alex knew they had to keep moving or risk losing everything. They moved quickly through the jungle, the path ahead still treacherous from the storm. The rain had stopped, but the ground was muddy, making each step harder than the last. Alex's thoughts raced, his mind constantly flicking between survival and the tiger's fading strength. They needed to get to safety, but the jungle was relentless. "We need to stay ahead of them," Alex said, his voice low. "We can't let them catch us." His team pressed forward, but exhaustion was setting in. Every move felt like a calculated risk, but there was no room for hesitation. Alex's heart raced with the urgency of their situation. The jungle clearing they reached offered a momentary respite, but the distant sound of engines soon shattered the peace. The authorities were closing in. Alex's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit. They couldn't stay here. The tiger's chances depended on getting out of this location without being caught. "We need a distraction," Alex said firmly. "They can't find us here." The team began to split up, each one preparing to do their part. Alex's mind raced with possibilities, but every plan came with its own risks. They had to move quickly or risk everything. The tiger was still alive, but they were running out of time. The plan was in motion. The first group would lead the authorities away, while the second group would take the tiger deeper into the jungle. The path was uncertain and the risks were high, but there was no turning back now. "On my signal we move," Alex said, his voice steady despite the chaos. The team positioned themselves, each member silently preparing for what came next. The jungle seemed to close in around them as the sound of engines grew louder. Alex's mind focused only on the task at hand. There was no more room for failure. With the distraction set, Alex's group moved swiftly through the dense jungle. The sounds of the engines in the distance grew fainter, but the pressure remained. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a branch felt amplified in the tense silence. "Keep moving," Alex urged, pushing forward, his eyes scanning the path ahead. The team had no time to waste. They had to reach safety before the authorities closed in on them. Alex's pulse raced as they moved through the thick underbrush, each step feeling more crucial than the last. The tiger's survival depended on their ability to stay ahead. They couldn't stop now. The jungle had fallen quiet as Alex stood at the edge of a clearing, his heart racing. The tiger was still breathing, weak but alive. They had made it. He turned to his team, exhausted but proud, realizing that this was more than a rescue, it was redemption. "We did it," Alex whispered, the weight of the past lifting in that quiet moment. As the team gathered, Alex realized this mission wasn't just about the tiger. It was about proving to himself he could still make a difference. He turned to his team. "We didn't just save an animal, we saved each other." They shared a quiet bond, one forged in the fire of their struggle. Alex knelt beside the tiger, its eyes opening. For a brief moment, they shared an unspoken trust. This wasn't about control or saving, it was about coexistence. The tiger had fought, and Alex had fought for it. "You're free now," Alex whispered as the tiger began to stand, unsteady but determined. The tiger took its first steps into the jungle, stronger now. Alex watched, feeling a sense of peace. The tiger had reclaimed its freedom, and so had he. He smiled softly, knowing that their journey together had come to an end. The wild had won, and the tiger was once again part of it. Alex stood alone in the jungle, the tiger gone, but its presence still felt. He had come here to save the tiger, but in the end, it wasn't just the animal that was saved, it was him. He smiled faintly, knowing that sometimes the struggle itself was enough. The wild had claimed its own, and so had he.